Good morning everyone. The topic for today's class is research ethics. This topic is going to be important to you because in your test you need to be able to explain what's meant by ethics in research, and you're going to need to use case study examples to help you explain why it's important for researchers to act in an ethical way when they ask people to take part in their research studies. So the first question is, what is ethical research? When we talk about ethics, we mean the moral principles that govern or influence our conduct. In other words, what's agreed within our profession to be the morally right and wrong behaviour in a specific situation. For example, it would be morally wrong or unethical for a doctor to publicly talk about a patient's private medical details. And the same is true for research with people. So ethical research is research that's conducted in an ethical way. That is, it obeys the rules of appropriate behaviour for researchers. Now, you might wonder why researchers need to worry about ethics when designing their research studies. And there really are three key reasons. The first reason is participant safety. This means that the people who are participating in the study need to know that they're being studied and their safety needs to be protected. Ideally, participants should be protected from harm to their physical well-being, their emotional well-being, and their reputation. Obviously, if a participant doesn't feel safe, he won't want to share his personal information. The second key reason for acting ethically is to protect the reputation of the researcher. If the researcher was discovered to have used unethical means to collect information, their reputation and employment status might be damaged, and they may not be able to conduct future research. At the very least, people would be much less likely to see them as a trustworthy professional. The third key reason is credibility of the research findings and the researcher's profession. If the researchers acted unethically, the work they produce might not be credible because people will ask whether the results have been affected by those unethical processes. For example, if it's discovered a researcher changed results that didn't fit with his or her hypothesis in one study, they won't only lose credibility for that study, but they'll raise questions about all the other research work that they've done. And if a psychologist, for example, acted unethically, then they might raise questions about psychology in general and maybe make people less likely to trust psychologists. So for all these reasons, researchers and the people that employ them or fund their work need to really think carefully about ethics while they're planning their research and while they're conducting their research. So the way that they do this is by applying particular ethical principles. Ethical principles help the researchers to conduct their studies safely. The first principle of do no harm is the most important principle of all. If a researcher thinks their study might be harmful to a participant, they have to be especially careful and get special permission before the study can go ahead. The second principle, voluntary participation, means that participants know they're in a study and have agreed to be part of it. Informed consent means that the participants have been given all the information they need to make a decision about whether they should participate or not. The fourth principle, avoid deceit, means that the researcher should not be deceiving the participants about the purpose of the study unless there is a very good reason for doing so. In the case where there is a good reason, for example, if telling the participants the real purpose of the study might influence the results, the researcher usually needs to get permission from an independent ethical committee before they're allowed to proceed. The last principle, confidentiality or anonymity, is about protecting the identity of the participants and the information they give to a study. Anonymity means that the researcher themselves does not know who gives the information. whereas confidentiality means that the researcher does know the identity but protects the participants by changing their names and details. These principles are the important values that allow a researcher to conduct ethical research, but they need some actual procedures or practices to help them to put the principles into place. In New Zealand, there are 5 key procedures that help researchers to keep their studies ethical and safe. First, they need to get permission from the relevant ethics committee before they even start their study. Second, they need to give every participant an information sheet that explains what the study involves. Third, they need to get participants to sign a consent form saying that they agree to take part in the study. Then, if the study is likely to have the potential for psychological or emotional harm, the researcher needs to give the participants a chance to debrief after the study is conducted. For example, a study on experiences of physical violence might upset someone who's been the victim of violence, so they need the chance to get support or discuss their feelings afterwards. Finally, it's important that there is some kind of supervision of the research by a peer or a senior researcher so that any problems or mistakes are noticed and addressed before somebody gets harmed. These procedures were put in place because sometimes in the past researchers did not work ethically and people were harmed. Your assignment is to find out about some case studies where this harm occurred and to think about how the ethical procedures we've covered today would help researchers to avoid the same kind of harm. The questions on this slide are the 3 questions you will examine in detail in your assignment. You need to answer the questions using this PowerPoint and the 2 readings on research ethics by Flanagan and by Tolich and Davidson. You can access the readings electronically from links on your course Moodle site. While you're reading them, you need to look for examples of specific case studies that you could use as examples to help you answer these questions. Here are the 2 articles that you need to read, and the case studies in green that are in these articles are particularly helpful for discussing the assignment questions. So you really need to look for those when you're reading them. Now, does anyone have any questions?